Hey, David Brewster here with the Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is Overdue Books. And I've had a lot of requests and messages asking me about, my published material, lessons and articles and books that I've had published. And I've also had messages, asking for, book recommendations and what's a good book. And, I have kind of introduced and kind of shown, a few books on camera recently. The Joe Satriani Guitar Secrets book, kind of popped up in the Joe Satriani arpeggio lesson. And and I've talked, kind of hinted at some other books, as I've made some of this material. And I've had a number of requests, so I thought, well, you're asking and you're interested, so I might as well talk about it. So I'm a music educator, a musician, obviously, but I'm also a teacher. And I've been teaching guitar since I was about 17, professionally. I started actually, teaching full time around that age. And I started performing with bands when I was about 15, and I joined a group. They were a lot older than I was. They were like in their 30s or pushing 40, when I was 15. And then before that, when I was 12, I actually had a joke published in Playboy magazine. So technically, I was published in writing before I'd even, really started playing guitar. And since that time, I've had some books published, I've written for some websites, I've written for some magazines, and definitely I've been writing for Guitar Player magazine since 2015, and lessons and articles, and this is just kind of a binder full of my work, with Guitar Player, and I'm definitely very honored and just, blown away that I've been working with this, very reputable and world-renowned magazine. So I'm very, very proud of that work. And I used to also write for Premier Guitar before that. And I've had, some articles and lessons with Premier Guitar. And definitely like the guys, over at Premier Guitar. It's been a few years since I've written for them. But then outside of that, I've also written for Reverb.com, LouderThanHell.net, TheMusicEdge.com, FenderRocks.com, and there's some other websites too. So aside from magazines and writing for websites, I've also published some books, and that's the next area we're going to move into here. As far as books that I've written and published, this kind of started a long time ago, and I started making lessons and material for my students. And then somewhere around 1999, I self-published a book. I was teaching in Evansville, Indiana, and I just kind of used it with my students. And it did really well. I just kind of sold it locally in Evansville, but I sold hundreds of copies of that book. And, my students used it. I had referrals. I had people that were traveling coming in just to buy it, and I thought, wow, okay, this is interesting. And then a few years after that, I wrote a book about harmonics, and Harmonics for Guitar was published by Hal Leonard in 2002. And as the title and the cover, kind of showcase, it's a book entirely written about harmonics and natural harmonics, artificial harmonics. There's tuning with harmonics, pinch harmonics, tapped harmonics, everything. And at the time when I wrote the book, there was another method on the market, but it was kind of more the Lenny Burrow kind of jazz style, which is really cool. But I noticed there really wasn't a book that talked about like Van Halen's harmonics and Billy Gibbons and Dimebag and Zach Wild, pinch harmonics and stuff like that. So this was my first published book. I'm really proud of this title, of course. And that was my first published work with Hal Leonard. And then that was followed by Introduction to Guitar Tone and Effects, which is 2003. And it's just a basic guide covering, guitar amps, pedals, effects, settings, kind of the basics of getting, equipment and acquiring, a good sound. And at the time when this was written, this was one of the only tone guides on the market that actually had a CD, so you could hear, this is what chorus sounds like, or distortion, or wah, or a talk box, or whatever, a flanger. And I'm very proud of that book as well. And then in 2004, I had another book published with Hal Leonard, Teach Yourself to Play Guitar, and that's become a bestseller on Amazon. And it's been a bestseller like the last 5 years in a row, which is great. And I'm very proud of that book as well. And I honestly, I didn't have a copy to show here on camera. It is framed, I think, over in one of my bins over there. But anyway, moving along, I also started writing for Sinistream, which is distributed through Hal Leonard. So it's kind of part of the same company. But I started writing for Sinistream. Here's Muting the Guitar, which this was 2009. And it just covers, muting and dampening and keeping things kind of quiet and controlled on the guitar as you play. And then in 2010, I had Power Picking from Sinistream published. And this is kind of a beginner book. It really helps beginners kind of learn where the strings are, and you kind of gain, some picking control and picking technique. And it revolves around a basic G major chord. So really the only requirement of that book, for a beginner is if you know a G major chord, then you can totally run wild with that book. And it really helps, your picking technique. Same year, 2010, I also had The Guitarist's Guide to String Bending and Vibrato published, which is just an overview of string bending and vibrato techniques in rock and blues and country and some different styles. The same year, in 2010, I had The Stylistic History of Heavy Metal Guitar published, and that was with Cherry Lane. And I'm really proud of this book. I put a lot of work into this, and it's kind of a stylistic overview of the history of metal guitar. And it's no longer in print, unfortunately. I just recently found that out. Cherry Lane actually closed their print division, and then slowly, since that time, books are starting to kind of disappear. And this is one of them, unfortunately. But it was published. I have copies of it. I'm very proud of it. But it does kind of make me sad to notice, like, oh man, this one's gone. And that's kind of the way of the world. I think, books are slowly disappearing. Now, in 2017, I had Guitar Harmony for the Rock Guitarist published, also with Sinistream. And this is just kind of an overview of building, 2, 3, and 4-part harmony guitar parts. Think of Iron Maiden or the Allman Brothers, or, really any 2-guitar band, where you hear harmonized guitar parts, Racer X and stuff like that. And, I'm basically talking about how to understand harmony and build, harmony guitar parts. And then also in 2017, I had the book Target Tones published with Sinistream. And Target Tones is basically a soloing guide or a concept as far as, different ways of targeting notes and chords and arpeggios when you're soloing. And by chords, I mean chord, fingerings, the shape of chords. And, it basically involves, thinking about the chord you're playing over and targeting, the best notes, like over a chord or a chord progression. It also uses looping technology, and TC Electronic was nice enough to send me this little ditto looper when I was working on this book. And also, like in the back, you can see there's kind of a basic guide, kind of a history of looping and sampling over here. There's Les Paul and Robert Fripp and some people like that. There's also a basic, guide to understanding, looping and loop pedals. So that's an interesting book. It's really different because you're looping, or you're, kind of layering something and then playing something over it and listening to, how it sounds. And then my 10th book, which is about to be released a little later this year, it's called Shapeshifting, and that's also with Sinistream. So I don't have a copy here to show you because it's not out yet, but Shapeshifting is basically another soloing guide where we're taking, arpeggio and scale and little chord fragment fingerings, and we're moving and kind of shifting around the fretboard. So you'll learn something in one position and then learn how you can kind of transpose it and move it around the neck. And, it taps into ideas from players like Paul Gilbert and Steve Vai. And there's a bunch of useful, ideas in that book. Now, I definitely don't want this to feel like some giant commercial. So to be fair, I'm going to show and recommend a few books that I didn't write. But I have had questions, about my material. So I thought, well, I might as well talk about it and kind of showcase it a little bit. But as far as other material and other books that I would recommend, and I have a pretty big library. I've been buying and acquiring books for myself, and also, for use with students for years and years, decades. And I don't really throw anything away like that. So I still have a lot of my old books and magazines and material, that I've been kind of hanging on to for a long time. But one book series that's relatively recent, and I'm really excited about this particular series. This is from Hal Leonard, and these are kind of reworked or updated versions of the old Hot Licks videos, back in the day. And this is the Eric Johnson, Total Electric Guitar book. And the Total Electric Guitar instructional video he made, like in the late 80s, is brilliant. It's a great instructional video. It's like about 2 hours long. And if you've never seen Total Electric Guitar, watch this video. It'll blow you away. I mean, if you're an Eric Johnson fan, you've probably already seen it. But, he talks about his gear, he talks about his influences, he talks about his picking, he breaks down all these cool licks and chords and ideas. But in the video, they didn't really transcribe, everything that you hear and see on screen. It's just certain licks and certain examples. But this, they basically went back and they transcribed, a lot of the things you hear Eric do in that video. And one thing I like about this is, when you buy the book, you do have online access to the video. So you can watch, the instructional video and, kind of learn from the transcriptions here. But one thing I like to do is sometimes, if I'm warming up or I wake up and I'm going to start playing guitar, I'll just grab this and just randomly open it to a page, anywhere. I'll just open it somewhere and just start sight reading and playing, and I'm not necessarily worried about copying, Eric Johnson's licks and stuff note for note. I'm just kind of walking through some of his ideas and his runs, and I just go really slow until I kind of feel like, I'm starting to connect and my hands kind of get synced up. And once I feel like I'm kind of warmed up, then I'll move on to something else. But I've kind of incorporated that a little bit in my practice routine. And then another book that I really haven't seen anybody talk about, but I will bring this up and kind of showcase it, is a book called Rock Guitar Secrets by Peter Fisher. And I've had this for a while. I'm not even sure how old this is. 1995. All right, so 1995. This has been around for a while. You can also see, if I can get it to do it, my copy's falling apart, right? And that's kind of the sign of a great book. If you have an instructional book and it still looks the same way it did when you bought it and it looks brand new, then that's probably not a very good book, or you just didn't read it. But then if you have books like this in your library where they're falling apart and maybe the binding's, messed up, or it's just, there's notes and scribbles and things, pencil marks and stuff inside, then that's the sign of a good book, chord chemistry or something like that. But this book, I've had for a while. I do remember I bought it like in a batch of books when I was preparing for some students, and I just needed some new material, and I bought books for myself and kind of also bought them, for them. And that's kind of a good excuse when you're a guitar instructor. You're like, well, I'm buying all these books, but they're for my students, But secretly they're for me too. But anyway, with this book, the reason why I like it, and I've used this with students for years, there's just a lot of information. You can see it's a pretty thick book. It's a lot of information. The author is from Germany, so he kind of has a different take on a lot of the common, licks and ideas and things that you see from American authors. So right off the bat, the person that put this together is from another country, if you're from America. And I really like it. I think that's part of it. It's just, he kind of put it together with a different mindset. It doesn't feel like the same old book, with the same old material. It's kind of different. The ideas, the licks, the way it's presented, it's very different. There's a lot of fretboard diagrams. Of course, there's lots of, notation and tablature. But just different ideas, and he's referring to Steve Vai or Paul Gilbert or Malmsteen or whoever, the whole time as he goes through it. But if you're looking for something, if you're an intermediate to kind of advanced level, guitarist, this is a great book. If you're a beginner, there's some things in here you can learn from, but it might kind of leave you in the dust if you're a pure beginner. But intermediate and advanced players, totally check this book out. It's awesome. All right, that's going to wrap up this quick rant about books and educational material. And I have had a few comments recently. I'm just going to take a second and kind of address this. I've had a few comments recently, like five or six, that have commented about me talking. And, I mean, I kind of understood what they were saying, but then at the same time, it's like, well, have you ever had a lesson? Have you ever had a music lesson with an instructor? I mean, I guess some people out there, they just want me to sit here, not say anything, and just shred guitar silently, for hours. Um, that's not how you teach, and that's definitely not a good way for you to learn. So I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, and I'm also obviously a musician too. So, really the only thing that's changed for me as far as my educational habits and what I do is this camera that's right here pointed at me. I've added a camera to my studio, and now I'm actually sharing, a little bit of myself musically or whatever on YouTube. So if you want me to talk less, good luck, because if there's one thing I love more than the guitar, that's talking about the guitar. If you get me on a subject, especially if it's related to music, I run wild. I start talking, I get excited. I want to explain things or express myself or, have a conversation. And that's how I am. So if my talking annoys you, sorry, watch another channel, because this is who I am. This is kind of how I carry myself. And I'm not going to really change, the way I'm formatting these lessons. So if I have a personal connection with a certain band or guitarist, or maybe I've seen them in concert or met them or interviewed them or whatever, if I just have some little nugget of information I want to share, I'm gonna share it. All right, sorry about the rant, but I just had to kind of get that off my chest. But leave some feedback and some comments, and I'll be back with some actual, educational material very soon. And please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it. Thank you.